So let's talk about AI a little bit, and please ask questions if you like. My first AI project was 1997, and at that time, AI was pure math. Like it was 100% hard skills. You have to do everything by yourself from the beginning. And now, AI is very humanistic. It's very interesting. It came from like a super technical space, and now we're talking about being responsible with AI, how to control bias, how to control fairness, and such. So we're going to be talking about responsible AI a little bit, just because as you scale with AI, if you don't do this, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be in trouble because of legislation, you're going to be in trouble because of ethics, you're going to be in trouble because of several things. Because AI is not only a software, AI is an agent that you train, especially now with something called agentic AI. We have agents that have a high level of autonomy to decide and act upon the data you feed them. Okay? All right. Okay. So what's happening right now in the market? Maybe you can, is it possible to take this off so people can see this? So we're on an inflection point, market-wise, as I mentioned on the consulting side. So I help our clients to use AI at scale responsibly. So what we're seeing right nowadays is an inflection point where AI is being used in several companies, is starting to grow, and right now we have limited control on responsible AI if you think about the market. So a lot of companies are implementing AI, and they already have AI in production, but they still need to implement a lot of tiers of responsible AI. We're going to talk about that. But now it's an inflection point because on one side, we have the demand, and we have the implementation, we have the technology, we have the data. And now all of us are thinking and learning how to control that and how to monitor and mitigate risks, okay? So in terms of CEOs, what the CEOs are saying? CEOs are saying that 65% of them, according to a survey, they recognize AI as an interesting element to drive value on the P&L, top line growth, operational efficiency, cash flow, and such. 65. 43% are already implementing AI in their corporations. 59, they plan to implement in the next 12 months. But we do have a huge homework in the market, which is related to the topic today. 67% of them see that there's a lot to do in terms of ethics, responsible AI usage, and controls. Out of every 10, almost 7, they recognize that we have a homework to do. A couple examples of what has happened recently. We had UHG, we had a situation there, this is public. We had an unfair coverage of claims, denials, there was a problem because of AI. We had several cases of bias. We had this one with Workday, with decisions and etc. with racial bias, right? We gotta remember, nothing here is intentional. AI is different from software engineering. You don't program AI, you train AI, right? So AI is going to behave according to the data you provided to AI. So it's trained. Sometimes in the data, there's bias, and you don't even know that. If you don't know how to control bias, you're going to be feeding a biased data to AI, and AI is going to behave that way with that bias. So that happened here. It happened here as well, where we had also a bias, and we had hallucination. Has anybody heard about hallucination before? So right now, the philosophy is trust but verify, right? So there are several ways of verifying what AI is presenting to you, and that's important as well. It's just we're talking about the context of the market. Now, let's talk about homework. Like, this is a heavy slide, right? But I'd say this is the homework for every one of us, professionally speaking. So what we can see here, this is just implications. This is the homework that every single company should be doing, just related to the AI Act. Has anybody heard about the AI Act before? All right, so what is the AI Act? AI Act is a legislation that was approved 1 year ago in Europe that establishes the guidelines for the use of AI, right? In 12 months, it's going to be reinforced. It's going to be enforced. So EU is giving its companies 24 months to adapt. And the whole thing here is what companies should be doing to abide by the AI Act in the EU. So we have elements like we have to define key stakeholders. That sounds obvious, right? But you cannot have AI without a human behind that. If you have AI by itself, you already have a problem. So accountability is very important. So you can have bias control, fairness control, but most importantly, two things: ownership and accountability, right? You have to have a risk management framework because there are so many elements, depending on the sector, like if you're in life sciences, for instance, you have to evaluate all the legislation that is not necessarily specific to AI, but you have to abide to, right? So before the intake of AI and AI use case, it's paramount that you have a risk management framework so you can evaluate the risks for a brand, the risks, the litigation risks, and even the implementation risks, right? So of course, I'm not going to be draining the slide here, but there are homeworks related to strategic management, AI governance, the design and build, the way you design AI matters, of course. I understand the audience here is not technical, we're not developers here, but this is very important. Like the whole thing here talks about how to actually design and implement AI responsibly. You have data governance and privacy, and then you have security, right? This is just to tell you guys that this is important, it's a big homework, and it's now happening now. So let's talk about just one use case. For every single implementation, we should be going through this process here. There should be several steps where we identify and qualify the intake in terms of risk, in terms of compliance, in terms of regulation, and in terms of your values, right? We're talking about AI implementations in companies, and it's important that every single company has or have their own AI principles, right? There are elements related to how you build and test AI use cases, and the way you test is going to allow you to evaluate and document your bias, your fairness, and other elements related to ethics that at some point you might be audited and you have to provide the documentation, right? Has anybody heard about the Rule 144 from New York City related to AI? All right, so if you are in the city, New York City, and you're using AI to evaluate a resume, for instance, there's a legislation in the city that you have to abide by. So legislation is related to, it can be in the city, it can be in a county, in a state, in a country, and in the whole continent. I was talking about European Union. So it's important that we understand its complexity and we create the frameworks to control that. And then we have elements that we have to execute for the intake of the use case, build the tests, and monitor the monitoring control. Can you see hallucination here? This is very, very important, as the more autonomous AI becomes, the more you have to take care of this, so you can trust and verify, okay? So this is complex, this is big, this is a framework, this is a responsible AI that talks about sustainability, data protection, accountability, explainability, reliability, fairness, transparency, security, and compliance. So you might be thinking, well, it sounds heavy. It's not necessarily heavy, but it's not a process that is established like in a week, in 2 months. It's a process, a continuous process that you protect yourself as a company, and you also learn, and in ways you make this more efficient. So for people that is in the audit world, you're going to be probably using this a lot. Not necessarily the framework itself, but you're going to be using AI regardless. At some point, you're going to be using it. Either to get a summary of the document, or to support you, to accelerate your audit process, you're going to be using this for sure. And then, what data is being fed to the AI you're using? You got to think about this. Am I accountable for what AI is feeding me? You got to think about this. Can I explain what AI is bringing me? Right? Because the AI is going to give you an output, but if you can take a look, if you understand what a neural network is, it's pretty much a black box. So it's hard, depending on the architecture that you use, you won't be able to explain exactly why AI got to that perspective of conclusion. So think about that, and transparency as well, security, compliance. So those things, although they are being executed and implemented by probably the technical teams that are implementing AI, all of us are going to be users. And in your roles, using this, it's important to understand and make sure that those dimensions, we're talking about 9 dimensions here, are covered. So if we think about the life cycle of an AI implementation, we have the use case initiation. I'm talking about the actual implementation. The data acquisition, the data preparation, and in every single one of those stages, there are several risks that need to be mitigated and controlled. And the way you do that control and mitigation is right here. I'm not going to cover those right now, but just so you have in your minds that you have to pay attention to those things here before using AI at scale. Okay? 10 minutes. So, have we heard about DevOps before? Development operations? Probably not. DevOps is a very agile way of developing software. I'm just opening the hood for you, so you can understand what goes into the software we're all using. So development ops is an agile way to develop software. Nowadays, there's something called MLOps and ModelOps. ModelOps is the agile way to create AI models. Why is it important? It's important because the more agile we move with AI, the more AI is going to be fluid. So we're all going to be receiving different models, different tools, like almost on a weekly basis, on your app, on your systems. And that's the way models are being produced nowadays. It's called ModelOps, just to have that in your minds. And the reason it's important is the traceability and transparency. So in terms of user adoption, every time we're using a software that contains AI, it's important that you think with yourself about the traceability and transparency, and understand how that model, how that software is being using the data, And what types of controls related to bias it's implementing. Just so you protect yourself and you extract the maximum from AI. All right? Okay, so we're talking about responsible AI, we're talking about risk. Let's talk about framework. Every company that is scaling with AI is probably either implementing, has implemented, or is thinking about implementing an AI strategy. Under the AI strategy, you're going to have the AI governance, which is the board that creates the AI principles, establishes the connections with the policies in that particular company, and very tactical elements related to the modeling, related to the data gathering, related to the validation, related to control. So all of those things are going to be embedded in systems that you audit. Every single element of AI are going to be embedded in different systems in the near future. And that means all the way from data risk, model risk, and compliance risk has to be mitigated and controlled. Right? I don't know if that's making sense, but that's a change. What we're seeing here is a change in the paradigm of software. Right? Until yesterday, SAP, Oracle, they were absolutely deterministic. The more AI we bring, the less deterministic it gets. Okay? Which is amazing because it gets more intelligent. But on the other side, it's important to understand this. So, talking about ModelOps, which is the way you produce AI nowadays, it's simple, hard to understand because you're going to have data ingestion here. And remember, data is the way you train AI. You're going to have vectorization, which is something new. Has anybody used GPT before? Right. So can you imagine that in ChatGPT, for instance, or in Gemini, we have all human knowledge since the beginning of times? All public human knowledge. So how can we store that amount of information in a database? That's because of this technology called vectorization. Now, has anybody connected different topics? Asking questions like, you can ask like macroeconomic questions and ask ChatGPT to reply to as if it was a firefighter. I can connect the dots. You can use philosophy and search. The only way you can connect the dots, semantically speaking, is using this technology here. And then you have model development, experimentation, and all those things that we talked about, which in conjunction is how you produce AI nowadays. Right? Every time someone like a data science is developing AI nowadays, that use case that is implemented is going to be evaluated according to a risk tier. And that's because there will be processes to mitigate the risk. Just jump a couple slides because we don't have a lot of time. But what's happening nowadays is once you have a use case that's going to be implementing AI, you're going to have a way of measure the risk of that particular use case. And then based upon that risk, there's going to be a different way of controlling and mitigating that risk. And there are different ways of doing this. One way is the calculator. You can have a calculator that calculates the risk, and then once you have that calculation, you can then adopt the best way of doing this. This is just one example. Here we have several use cases, and some of the use cases are in the low risk range, some of them are in the medium. We don't have anyone on the critical. But that's just one way that the market's doing right now. That's one of the things the market's doing right now to evaluate how to responsibly scale with AI. This is a process where we get from the use case intake, and we go all the way to the actual implementation, where this is going to be available to you. So this is under the hood. This is what's happening. We should be actively seeking this. Like if I'm using here AI, I should be asking questions about the process of evaluating the risk and mitigating the risk, so I can use something like I trust.